Welcome, colleagues, to one of Ofsted's curriculum unit series of videos. In 2019, when we launched our education inspection framework and ran roadshows across the country to share our curriculum thinking, we recently revisited those principles and shared an abridged version of those 2019 roadshows to help make our messages as sticky as possible. You may also know that we've recently released research reviews for many areas of the curriculum, and our subject leads have shared short videos which consider how pupils make progress and the implications for curriculum thinking. Our reviews and videos have been received with enthusiasm and have been followed by a series of requests for us to speak at further national, regional and local events. To make our insights as accessible as possible and to provide even more detail, we've compiled a new suite of webinars to support the sector. And in today's webinar, we turn our attention to personal development, and please look out for other videos where our curriculum unit cover the different subject areas. Just before we get going, I wanted to emphasize what I hope will be a few reassuring points. Firstly, we've structured this video in such a way that I hope it means that it'll be useful and accessible for teachers working in all phases of education. Secondly, Ofsted doesn't expect the language or specific examples shared today to be replicated in schools. Instead, we hope that the insights shared will illustrate general principles about effective personal development programs, and that you'll find these useful as you develop and refine provision in your school, particularly given the challenges of the last 2 years. As our inspection handbook makes clear, schools have the flexibility to choose their own curriculum approaches, as long as there's been sufficient thought to its content, structure, sequencing, and implementation. So this video is in 3 parts with some very approximate timings there. The first part sets out the context for personal development to help us understand it. And then in session 2, we'll look at the implications for teaching, assessment, and some other factors in relation to personal development. We'll also look at considering priorities in terms of people's catching up after the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we'll look at how all of this relates to both primary and secondary schools. When it comes to part 3, you can just watch whichever one applies to your school, although there are some general useful messages in both sessions, so you're welcome to watch both if you so choose. So let's start by focusing on the actual principles that lie behind personal development. And we're going to start by thinking and being clear about what personal development actually is. And actually, it isn't a single thing, but it's a collection of different elements that are brought together. And so here's an image to help us to understand that. A school lunch in a sandwich box, some other items for school such as pens and paper, and all of them contents for a school bag. Let's explain this in a diagram. Let's begin with the first thing that a child might do to get ready for school in the morning. They might make their lunch. So we'll start with a sandwich. And this is the sandwich of RSHE. And it's made up of the following elements that are found in the statutory RSHE guidance: relationships education, sex education where it's taught, and staying healthy, which itself has 2 elements: physical health and mental well-being. And think of these as the salad in the sandwich, as it were. So it's the RSHE salad sandwich. And that sandwich goes into the lunchbox of PSHE. The consensus is that PSHE should also contain other elements too. Pupils' wider safety, so teaching them about road safety, the risks of, for example, deep water, electricity, railway lines, as well as perhaps teaching them how to handle school equipment safely, saws and glue guns and so on. And then there's economic understanding, the E in PSHE. And there's understanding of what we might call digital and media technology, all of these done for good reason, because they are preparing pupils for life in modern Britain. And it's difficult to see how a pupil who wasn't taught about, say, what money does, about crossing the road safely, or about the digital ways in which we receive so much of our information these days, would be properly prepared to thrive within it without being taught about it. And some schools add other elements into their lunchbox too, teaching about philosophy or thinking skills or mindset approaches and the like, or even several of them, and some don't. But remember, though, that though the RSHE guidance sets out clearly the content to be taught, so that are those orange elements there, there's no guidance as to what other elements should go into the PSHE. other than the RSHE content, it's not only up to schools when to teach things, but what to teach. So up to a point, every school decides what to put in the blue sandwich box. But the school bag's not full yet, just as a child needs these other items too, a ruler and pen, writing paper and the like, so personal development has got other elements to it. Citizenship, which some schools include as part of their PSHE and some teach separately, as well as the development of character, wider opportunities for pupils, learning about British values, teaching pupils about inclusion and ensuring equality of opportunity. For secondary schools, careers, information, education, advice and guidance. And lastly, for all pupils, SMSC, spiritual, moral, social and cultural development. So these are the other elements which, together with the things in the PSHE lunchbox at the top, make up personal development. And although it's important to think of them distinctly, these elements continually overlap and interplay with each other. And although there are subjects within personal development, such as citizenship, the aims of citizenship are different from, say, history or mathematics. And therefore, I'm going to refer to personal development as a whole, as a programme that schools think about and provide to meet a large number of different wider aims for their pupils, as opposed to a curriculum. Having said that, you'll see there are many ways in which the design and delivery of this programme will align with the same sort of thinking that should happen when staff in schools consider subjects like history or maths. And we'll come on to this next. There are some key principles that lie behind an effective personal development programme, and I'm going to go through each one. They aren't in a specific order, but we'll go through them one at a time. So the first one is about what leaders want when they design their personal development programme. The long-term goals need to be clear, those that for the end of a key stage and from when pupils leave the school. And from this, breaking this down for, say, each topic or strand taught in a particular way. So what will pupils in year 5 say now at the end of that 6-week topic on, let's call it healthy body, healthy mind? And how will each of the lessons in that topic build up pupils' knowledge so that pupils will reach the intended finish line by the end? Much of the content in relationships and health education will no doubt be found in that guidance, but they may include other things, such as teaching pupils about, for instance, domestic violence. If they do, that's fine, but they should be able to explain their rationale for doing so and how it will contribute to those big end goals. And no doubt pupils won't remember every single thing they're taught. So out of all the things in that topic or strand, leaders should have decided what are the crucial things pupils mustn't forget or have any misunderstanding over. The stability of each element is also important. Elements, and especially those of RSHE, should be broadly stable in nature, because leaders have thought deeply and made those clear decisions as to what to include in the timescale and why. And planning not suffering from adjustment from media fads, for example. Often there can be considerable flexibility given to teachers in how and even what they deliver. But too much flexibility here risks two things: that the curriculum might not be politically impartial, and even if that isn't an issue, too much time then taken away on lessons to try to teach new things, leaving staff too short of time to cover the things that leaders originally decided were crucial. So if leaders do want to introduce new elements, they'll want to think really carefully about how much time to permit for this and why. The curriculum doesn't want to be too rigid. Teachers will need a bit of room to adjust things so that they can, for instance, repeat them if they find that pupils don't understand something, or even if there are some undiscovered gaps in pupils' knowledge, which resulted from things not being covered well enough during the pandemic. So a degree of flexibility, yes, but not too much. Broadly, there should be sufficient stability. The second principle. All elements should be given sufficient time and prominence so that their aims are met and pupils understand what they need to. Choices, prioritising and sequencing provide opportunities to rehearse, learn and remember important knowledge. No element within personal development should be delivered in a cursory tick box way. The knowledge within personal development is too important to be fitted in as and when. And how much is enough time? enough for leaders' aims to be met, and for pupils to remember what they need to. When leaders think about what important knowledge is, sufficient time in the school week needs to be set apart to deliver it. That there's enough time across lessons, assemblies, form time, or tutor time for pupils to know and remember what they need. And content will often need sufficient repetition and rehearsal for pupils to embed it in their long-term memory. More emphasis will need to be given to the most important content, and lessons and activities will need to be placed in an effective logical order so that pupils can build up what they know over time. On to the next principle. Elements should support each other so that they contribute to a cohesive whole. That helps pupils to make connections between the different elements and thus build their understanding. So the importance of, say, learning about respect in relationships is related to learning about British values and to citizenship. And so pupils are taught to see the links between, say, someone's mental health and how it will impact on their physical health and also on their relationships. How learning about different communities and the things we have in common in SMSC links to both relationships, citizenship, and to other subjects such as religious education. Activities and opportunities should not be tokenistic, but be making a meaningful contribution to helping pupils to learn and build their overall understanding. Next, content should become progressively more complex, reflecting ambition for pupils rather than simply repeating the same as if new every year. Personal development isn't an academic subject akin to, say, maths or history, but nevertheless it should be structured to help pupils know and remember. It's true that cognitive science teaches us that in order for things to be embedded in long-term memory, they must often be taught repeatedly. But over time, the aspects that are taught should become increasingly complex. As pupils get older, they aren't served well by a school that doesn't want them to engage with demanding new ideas that build on what they already know. So not just doing the same anti-bullying poster year after year, for example. So enough practice and repetition to remember what they need, but not at the expense of ambition. Next, the personal development programme should be reflected by the school's values, expectations, culture, and ethos. How what leaders and staff do and the expectations they put in place, it's about coherence and consistency. So, for example, does the school's behaviour policy align with it? Are pupils expected to explicitly behave in ways that reflect the content on relationships and through the school's approach to the development of character? Are the school's systems and policies for equality of opportunity fully enacted so that pupils are given equal access to resources and opportunities, and inclusion is promoted across the school in a way that upholds and teaches them the importance of respecting others, even when they're very different from them? Does the school's action to uphold governors' legal obligations under the Equality Act and to ensure impartiality of personal development programme delivery mean that the use of resources or organisations that advocate or provoke extremist positions are not used? Or is that left unchecked? And what of leaders' communications with parents? Does it, for example, support the effectiveness of the RSHE curriculum by helping parents to understand issues such as online sexual abuse and harassment, and advice or information on how they can support their children to learn about aspects such as consent? All of these things are evidence of the messages that leaders are sending as to how important they consider personal development to be, and how well they've ensured that it's coherent, cohesive, and helps pupils to gain the information and skills they need. And lastly, each element should help, support, and contribute to pupils' better behaviour and attitudes. Leaders should intend and expect it to habitualise behaviour associated with good character. There are many strong influences on pupils from outside school: their family, friends, the media, the impact on social media, and all of these will have an impact on pupils' behaviour. So the personal development programme will by no means be solely responsible for how they behave in school. But nevertheless, leaders should reasonably be expected that it's going to positively support people's attitudes and behaviour. It should be aimed to making as strong a contribution as possible, with leaders planning how it could maybe address issues relevant to the school, such as sexual harassment or any derogatory comments over time. It should try to habitualise behaviour associated with good character, including behaving respectfully and cooperating consistently well with others. It isn't enough for the programme just to expect pupils to learn the knowledge. But leaders can look at the way that pupils behave, and this will help assess how well pupils have remembered it. So, for example, leaders knowing that pupils must understand the idea of respect because they can see pupils behaving respectfully. So these 6 key principles should lie behind any effective personal development programme. And looking at the elements in a school's programme will help show which ones are present and which ones are not. So here are the most important points in a summary form for our first session. Personal development is a collection of different elements. Effectiveness rests on key principles around its aim, its sequencing, its importance, its cohesion, its alignment with the school's ethos, and its intended contribution to pupils' behaviour and attitudes. On to our second session. As we've made clear, although this is personal development, it should still be constructed to help pupils know and remember. So lots of the points in this next session also apply to any curriculum subject. I want to begin by making clear the distinction between the personal development programme itself and the pedagogy that is used to implement it, or if you like, how personal development is written and mapped out and how it's actually delivered. Over the years, we've seen huge amounts of advice and may well have attended training and presentations showing us how to be better teachers, how to deliver those elusive, outstanding lessons and so on, even how to be an outstanding teacher, how to question pupils, how to establish a good rapport with them and so on. And certainly the delivery of anything is important. We all know that pupils won't learn from even the most effective curriculum planning if it's not delivered effectively. But at least until relatively recently, the delivery, the teaching, has taken such a lion's share of educational thinking that there's been more limited attention paid to precisely what needs to be delivered. And crucially, that what needs to be considered first, the actual what it is that pupils need to learn. And once that's been decided, then to think how best to deliver it. But deciding and planning the what must come first, then that thinking of the best way to help pupils know and remember this. Otherwise, there's a danger in delivering engaging lessons without having a really clear goal or purpose for them. So let's think about the what. Of course, the idea is built up over time that the knowledge that pupils will need, so that it's cumulatively sufficient for them. And sufficient for what? As always, it's best to begin with the end in mind, the ultimate big end goal that we want from our pupils. And what is this goal? Well, for example, here's the statement from the start of the RSHE guidance. That's what we want pupils to have here. Enough knowledge for them to know how to be safe and healthy and how to manage their academic, personal and social lives in a positive way. And this is something that all of the RSHE elements should ultimately be directed towards reaching. But this big end goal is not a curriculum in itself. It's far too broad. So what things would go to make this up? We have to be more specific. Well, if it's a school's RSHE, a huge proportion of it will be found in the content of the RSHE guidance. And here is some of it. Now, it might be that the school also decides to include other things that aren't included in the guidance, but that's fine. The same approach will be used as I'm illustrating here. So all of these things are contributing to that big end goal. There's a line of sight between them. But even these bullet points are pretty high level. So let's just take one of them as an example. How to report concerns or abuse, and the vocabulary and confidence needed to do so. And this is, remember, one of the things that will achieve the big end goal there. We might call this the composite because it's very broad. It's quite a complex skill to develop. In order for pupils to do this, they're going to need to know a lot of other things first, which underpin it. And here are some of them. There are other things a child would need to know here, and I haven't listed them all here due to a lack of space, but hopefully you'll get the point. And we might call these the components. We'll teach these because they're the crucial things to help pupils understand the composite. And then that composite will help achieve the big end goal, that clear line of sight again. And remember, it's up to schools to decide what to teach and when, and to put things in a sensible sequence that help build up knowledge over time. But whatever we're planning, it's about having that clear line of sight with the components being sequenced to build up the composites, and then the composites building up to the big end goals. There can still be a debate about whether schools should focus on knowledge and skills. Research shows us that this is actually a false binary. It isn't one or the other, it's both. But it's knowledge that underpins everything. And here's why. Certainly, we'd want pupils to say report any concerns they had, or if they were being abused, but pupils can't have the skill to do this unless they first know what abuse is. So let's look at those components over there on the left. They're all knowledge. Pupils must learn these things first. If they don't, for example, know that their bodies belong to them and that they have a right to be safe, they can't understand that it's wrong to harm someone's body. So they have to know these things first, and probably other things too, such as who to go to. But all of that component knowledge can result in the composite and how to report those concerns. And then that in turn results in an ability to perform the skill. In this case, the skill of actually reporting it confidently, turning the understanding into an action, applying what they know. Of course, this is often tricky to measure in personal development because teachers may not actually see them perform this in school. And one reason our framework steers away from measuring the impact on an individual pupil. Of course, hopefully they won't even ever need to apply this skill in school, or even ever, but we can assess whether pupils have the knowledge to be able to perform it if they ever needed to. Pedagogy. As explained earlier, having decided what to teach pupils, it's necessary to deliver these effectively. It's worth remembering that personal development doesn't just happen in formal lessons. For example, teaching about relationships may well be included in assemblies or messages and displays on corridors. We may see positive, mutually respectful relationships being explained and promoted during lunchtimes or on a school trip. Nevertheless, and particularly in a classroom situation, what's true for the delivery of, say, geography is also true for personal development. However well planned it is, its effectiveness will be hampered if it is not delivered well. Ofsted's thematic review made a clear point about how the impact of RSHE is often being impaired by the delivery from staff not being sufficiently well trained or supported to be skilled or knowledgeable or confident enough to fully support pupils. Insufficient subject knowledge to ensure confident delivery, especially on topics like consent, healthy relationships, and the sharing of sexual images. It's therefore really important that those who deliver personal development have sufficient training to do it with visible confidence, including being able to answer the questions that pupils have. Do they explain things well? Do they notice when pupils don't understand something and address it? We know that pupils have many misconceptions around so many elements of personal development. So how well do staff put it right and challenge myths and misinformation? So it's important that staff are clear about why pupils are doing this or that. Why are they, for example, cutting up statements about drug misuse? Is the activity fit for purpose? To achieve a clear aim towards a composite? Or is there too much new knowledge being delivered too quickly, overloading pupils' working memory? Or is there an effective balance between new content and a rehearsal or consolidation of what's already been covered? Do teachers begin their explanations at the point of pupils' current understanding? And whenever possible, link new content to that previously learned, so that there'll be an accumulation of knowledge about, for example, keeping healthy? Or do staff not check what pupils know at all? Of course, that checking could be very brief, particularly if the last lesson was yesterday and by the same teacher. He or she may already know almost precisely where to pick up and run with it. And are relationships positive and respectful so that teachers command pupils' attention? Or do pupils feel they're being lectured at or patronised or moralised to? Pupils tell us that they do want this information. So is the climate hindering this being given or helping it? Assessment. There are some who think that personal development can't be assessed at all. This is a flawed approach. Teachers can check what pupils have remembered in, say, relationships or about British values, local or national government, or credit card versus debit cards, just as they can check knowledge in mathematics or music. Unlike pedagogy, the messages about an effective approach to assessment in those or other curriculum subjects is also true for personal development. So your assessment should check if pupils know the specific content that you might need to reteach if their recall is not sufficiently secure. Assessment is, though, one of the aspects that are potentially weaker in a personal development programme in many schools, even when many of their other facets of personal development might be really positive. It doesn't have to be cumbersome or overcomplicated or excessive at all. In fact, being manageable is the key. Formative assessments such as brief, low-stakes tests or quizzes can be used to check pupils' understanding regularly and help embed key content in memory. Assessment needs to be timely and results used to help teachers reflect on the success of their delivery and sequencing and whether there's been enough repetition. Where gaps exist in what pupils know, and given the pandemic there are likely to be gaps, leaders should know what they are. And they can show how the current personal development programme is being tailored to rectifying this for these pupils, helping them to catch up. But whatever system staff use, it needs to be at the right level so that if pupils have paid attention, there's a high chance of success, which makes pupils look forward to it. And as I've said, assessment results are a good opportunity to evaluate aspects of their curriculum. If it's found they haven't remembered this or that securely, then this information will be used to consider whether or not it needs more time to teach it next time. Not doing this risks the same result happening with future cohorts. The presence of knowledge and skills around personal development will lead to effective systems for it to flourish. It's really important that underpinning personal development are persons who are given the time and capacity to have a clear understanding of it and how it's delivered. For the programme to meet clear aims, leaders need a strong knowledge of the programme and what those aims are. They need to make sure that planning has identified clearly the components that teachers need to deliver and when, and that each of the activities has been thought through to make sure it's the very best way of contributing to those aims. They organise effective and regular training so that staff have sufficient knowledge and thus the confidence to deliver it with accuracy, particularly any new content. And teachers not being left unfamiliar with the content that leaders ask them to deliver. Leaders acting as a visible source of support with up-to-date information for colleagues. And using regular effective monitoring and evaluation and review of the programme, leaders can identify any weaker elements and then make plans about them that may well be underway to address them. So what's the best way of helping pupils to catch up from any gaps that they may have delivered over COVID? Well, the good news is that tools for recovery are the same as those for effective curriculum design and delivery. So that means firstly gaining an accurate picture of the circumstances of personal development in the school. Firstly, looking at what content has not actually been taught at all, or only taught in passing for whatever reason. And then teachers assessing, using questioning in lessons or whatever other system the school's using to find out what pupils don't know well enough or may have forgotten. And then thinking about how crucial it is that pupils learn the different components. Are some things more important than others? Which? And why? Are there some things that are really crucial because without it, pupils will be really unable to understand what's coming next? This step will include considering contextual factors, such as how much time you have left to teach it. Are there some things that absolutely have to be taught now, rather than delayed, as well as other things to consider? For instance, perhaps you judge you want to prioritize certain things and teach those next, or spend more time on them than you originally had planned to. Perhaps there's been, say, an increase in your pupils being targeted for online grooming, or perhaps any other aspect that might be relevant. A spike in sexual harassment in school, perhaps. Remember, giving pupils knowledge that will help them to stay safe must take priority. But you'll also want to take account of how people's behaviour and well-being has been affected by the pandemic. If there's a need to address, say, an aspect of or aspects of mental well-being, has there been sufficient opportunity to discuss what is normal and what help is available and how to access this? And then thinking about how you're going to teach the things that you need to. As there isn't any less time available, you're going to have to spend less time on teach at the same time as another aspect or shift around the school year. Do think carefully about missing out anything entirely, as you've already decided what you've got is really important. And think very carefully about introducing new content, as this will only constrain time further. And then 2, devising a plan to build up pupils' knowledge sequentially over time and to filling those gaps with enough time devoted for this and sufficient repetition for pupils to remember. 3, ensuring the plan is implemented through consistently effective teaching. What are the most efficient activities for pupils to learn the knowledge they need? 4, don't assume your actions will necessarily produce exactly what you intend. It's important to check whether they do. So monitor the impact on your pupils. And then 5, evaluate what you find and then review and adjust either your curriculum planning or your delivery or both where needed. So here are the most important things to take away from session 2. The planning of the what should be considered before the how. Elements need time to build cumulatively sufficient knowledge over time, from the small components to the composite and on to the big end goals. Teaching or pedagogy should deliver effectively the planned curriculum for those elements. Effective recovery needs careful thought and should be based on the priorities of pupils. So on to our third aspect. So in this session, we're going to cover the early years, relationships education, and citizenship in primary schools. And let's begin with the early years, and for good reason. Children start receiving information about themselves in relation to others from the time they walk in the door on their very first morning in the early years. The moment they look up and see the expression on the faces of the staff member who greets them, to the tone of voice that the person uses when they greet them, a personal development program has begun for them. And this will continue every day, with knowledge being continually updated as children make sense of the world. So if adults can't avoid teaching about something about personal development from those very first moments, it's important that leaders really think about what the program is going to consist of and to start their planning from personal development from then on. Whether leaders intend it or not, all of these aspects will come into play. For example, children being taught to understand how their behaviour affects others is early knowledge which will later lay firm footings for what they'll learn about, say, British values, citizenship, relationship education, and in fact, all of these things. There can't be two separated curricula, one for the early years and then beginning something entirely different in the rest of the school in year 1. Perhaps the biggest objective is not that children will achieve the early learning goal in, say, PSED and physical development, but how it will fit like a jigsaw into what children will go on to learn in year 1, where they will build on what they've already been taught, outwards and outwards. Seamless progression, and from this on to year 2 and beyond. Ever more detailed and complex, so that pupils will be able to link different pieces of their knowledge up. So do leaders consider fully this whole narrative? Because here's the important thing. Pupils won't actually be able to fully understand this jigsaw piece, or this one, unless they can remember how it relates to the pieces before it. Going back to from year 3, year 2, and year 1, starting on that very first day in the early years, and this would include right back into nursery where there is one. And then having those pieces in place allows the others to be slotted in subsequent year groups, making the building of further knowledge possible. Every child may be unique, but every one of them needs to learn the same things: how to cooperate, how to share, how to stay safe, and crucially, how to communicate. Communication is essential for understanding and expression, and it's here that these things must begin to be taught. But remember, the early years is not just about a time when staff sit children down for direct teaching. The personal development programme must take account of and include what adults say and do, including direct teaching, yes, but as well as communication, showing, modelling their own behaviour, physically, tone of voice, vocabulary. How staff have deliberately constructed the environment, both in the classroom and in any outdoor space, to support and enable. So routines and expectations, lining up, snack time, turn taking, children expected to tidy up and share. And what children say, and also how they perform, how they react to others, and also behave alone, but with both other children and with staff. So whether directly or indirectly, staff should be ensuring that children receive very consistent messages about relationships. Are they taking account of the new inclusion in the EYFS, helping children to understand the language of feelings so that they can appropriately develop their emotional literacy? Curriculum care practices should, and I quote, promote and support children's emotional security and the development of their character. So continuous, high-quality interaction with children is crucial. If new words and phrases about relationships are being taught, children will need to hear them repeatedly over time until they become familiar with them and not only understand them, but use them themselves. Also, children learning about different groups and communities and simple similarities and differences in them so they can begin to make connections between their own lives and the cultures of others. These are the first steps which will help pupils to go on to understand British values when they're older, as well as give children cultural development as part of SMSC. Similarly, children should be expected to follow rules and make early choices. These are the first steps in helping them to understand much later the meaning of democracy. And crucially, across all of these activities, staff should be aware of what children have learned and remembered. Where it isn't what they've intended, staff should adjust what they do and, for example, teach it again, perhaps using new ways. This will all help to ensure that children are well prepared for year 1. Relationships education. So much of personal development flows from the teaching of relationships. Quite understandably, schools have been teaching pupils about relationships long before the RSHE guidance was written. And let's be clear, this is part of helping pupils to be prepared for modern Britain, giving them the information they need to stay safe and not just to survive, but to thrive in today's world with its rules and laws and expectations and systems. Unless they're taught it, they won't be able to do this. And schools have a vital role in teaching pupils from the early years onwards about relationships, including the physical and mental changes that they will encounter ahead of in adolescence. Leaders should teach the relevant content in the RSHE guidance, but may well have a rationale for including other things too, such as teaching pupils knowledge about relationships, breakups, and the ways to manage and handle conflict. They should just ensure they have a clear reason for this. Relationships content must be taught at a point that pupils can understand it. So in an age-appropriate way, building on what's come before, and done sufficiently regularly so that pupils remember it. Leaders should, of course, aim to cover the relevant content in the RSHE guidance by July 2022 and be able to explain any content that staff are prioritising as a result of the pandemic. But the coverage should be meaningful. Fleeting encounters, poorly planned, will not be enough. Placing an emphasis on teaching pupils the signs of healthy and unhealthy relationships and on staying safe is really important. We could describe this as effectively putting a little traffic light into the system in people's heads to help them to build trusting relationships, but also to warn them when something's starting to go wrong. A critical part of RSHE is building up pupils' knowledge to teach them about key concepts, such as privacy, respect, permission seeking and permission giving, and commitment. Respect brings with it, of course, respect for others in different types of families or relationships. This will then give them the basis for learning about consent and intimate relationships at secondary schools. As mentioned earlier, RSHE is a place where pupils are likely to have many misunderstandings and misconceptions. They also want important information and questions answered. So it's really important that myths are addressed and put right, and that there's an opportunity for them to receive the straight answers that they need. The teaching about respect, of course, is linked closely to teaching about British values and learning about the protected characteristics. And while we're talking about these, let's remember that this isn't a pub quiz. Pupils aren't being judged on whether they know 3 of these by the time they're in year 5, for example. This is about learning about how pupils belong to many groups and that being a member of some groups can cause some other groups to be unkind to them or treat them unfairly, and that is wrong. There's also a very important point to be made about how those with SEND are supported to learn the curriculum. We know that these pupils are more vulnerable to abuse, are less likely to report it, and the time corresponding to any concern being addressed tends to be longer. So how have leaders considered these pupils' individual needs to support them to learn the relationships element, to stay safe, and to build their independence? Leaders should consider the different needs of these pupils, and let's remember they will be different. So the solutions for a pupil with moderate learning difficulties may be different from a pupil with a communication need, or one who's been diagnosed as having autism, for example. And how are these pupils being supported to learn about, for example, the subtle indicators in someone's voice or face that they might be trying to deceive them? Are pupils supported to use the terms no and don't like? Are they being helped to see the different ways that someone could coerce them into doing something? Citizenship. Why is this important? Well, our personal development judgment includes an expectation that all schools will provide this. Meaningful opportunities to understand how to be responsible, respectful, active citizens who contribute positively to society. So they'll need to be taught about society and exactly what it means to be a citizen so that they can understand how they could and should contribute. There's that knowledge again, which will then bring about the skills. And citizenship is also vital in primary schools to get pupils ready for the statutory curriculum in Key Stage 3 and 4. Pupils need to be well prepared in their previous school. Many schools integrate citizenship into their wider PSHE curriculum, and that's a decision for them. We don't take any view on this. We're just concerned how effectively, whatever the programme is. But a primary school can't avoid teaching aspects of it because not teaching about the crucial things covered in citizenship means that they're unlikely to be being sufficiently well prepared for life in modern Britain. The DfE provides a non-statutory curriculum for Key Stage 1 and 2 from 2015. There it is. And the good news is that much of the content in that is now covered in the RSHE guidance. And that if this is well planned and delivered effectively, that'll mean that in many ways, pupils will be well prepared for the citizenship curriculum in Key Stage 3. Most, but by no means all. However, some things aren't included in the new guidance, and schools should consider how and when they teach these things too. So what things? Well, in Key Stage 1, contents not covered by the RSHE guidance includes these things: recognising choices and the difference between right and wrong, the need for rules and how they help everyone, how pupils belong to different groups and communities. All of these things are, of course, composites. Knowing the difference between right and wrong isn't easy. In fact, it's one of the most difficult things to teach pupils. But even an age-appropriate understanding will take time to build up through small components. But teaching these first components early on will help pupils to understand more complex things later, such as there are some things almost everyone agrees are right and wrong, but other things that adults can't agree on one way or the other, and that there are many shades of grey, about how the world is endlessly full of decisions and arguments and debates and questions about morality. But as these things aren't covered in the guidance, everyone would agree that it's vital that pupils understand them and that they need to be factored in somehow. And then these things in Key Stage 2. What democracy is, and about the institution and elements that support it locally and nationally. How and why rules are made. Appreciating the range of national, regional, religious and ethnic identities in the UK. And understanding voluntary community and pressure groups. Again, these things are composites, so they need to be delivered in small components and repeated so that pupils remember them. But if pupils have been taught comprehensive guidance in Key Stage 1, together with the content from the RSHE guidance, they're likely to be better prepared for learning these things. And again, as these things aren't covered in the RSHE guidance, they need to be planned in somehow. The second aspect of citizenship brings us back to the handbook. Pupils should be expected to know and discuss and debate ideas and issues in a considered way. As soon as they are ready, pupils should receive regular, ambitious opportunities to consider the views of others, weigh evidence, and articulate reasoned responses to questions. The personal development programme's sequencing should ensure, of course, that pupils first have acquired sufficient knowledge of the relevant issue that they're asked to discuss. It's not effective to expect our pupils to debate, say, global warming when they know very little about green issues and can't do it with any degree of success. But these opportunities should include the teaching and rehearsal of age-appropriate knowledge and the vocabulary and social conventions and ground rules for discussion and debate and reflection. It's difficult to overemphasize the importance of this. Staff should expect pupils, as soon as they're old enough, to try to explain in full sentences to aid their clarity of thinking and support the formation of logical arguments. As pupils become older, they should be expected to use and practice phrases such as, in my opinion, I believe, words such as logical and illogical, sentence structures such as firstly, secondly, words such as evidence and conclusion. This is ambition for pupils. It gives them the language they need to work with others, to work in a team, to agree and articulate a response. These skills are absolutely fundamental to ensuring that pupils, and particularly those who are disadvantaged, have cultural capital and the confidence to communicate. We've all seen too many examples of pupils knowing what they want to say, but just not being able to articulate it clearly and struggling to make themselves understood. They're trapped in the prison house of language. So this needs regular time devoted to it because it's all about pupils developing real practical skills that they can use when they're older and as adults in many different contexts, whether it's at a professional meeting, in a workplace, at a place of further or higher education. It's the verbal equivalent of knowing number bonds and your multiplication tables. And schools that are highly ambitious for pupils might include valuable opportunities for them to be able to speak publicly to audiences, including adults not well known to them, as well as take part in debates where pupils are required to argue with consideration and thought. In order for pupils to be successful, they must be articulate, and schools must do all they can to bring that about, because an articulate pupil feels an inner confidence to perform. So here are the key points from this session on the primary curriculum. Personal development should be a seamless progression from the start of the early years until the last day in Year 6. Relationships education should put a traffic light in the head of every pupil, giving them the knowledge they need to stay safe and make well-informed decisions. Citizenship education is essential to help pupils prepare for life in modern Britain. This element should blend subject knowledge with the aim of ensuring pupils are as articulate as possible. We're going to cover 3 of the elements from personal development in this session for secondary schools: relationships education, sex education, and careers information, education, advice and guidance. Secondary schools are places where young people are learning to become adults, as well as negotiating the physical and psychological effects of adolescence. Their parents cease to be the most powerful influence in their lives, and instead this becomes their peers. Leaders should teach the relevant content in the RSHE guidance, but may well have a rationale for including other things too. They should just ensure that they have a clear justification for this. So relationships content must be taught at a point that pupils can understand it, so in an age-appropriate way, building on what's come before, and done sufficiently regularly so that pupils remember it. Leaders should, of course, aim to cover the relevant content of the RSHE guidance by July and be able to explain content that staff are prioritising as a result of the pandemic. This may well be because of gaps in pupils' knowledge as a result of COVID, but the coverage should be meaningful. Fleeting encounters, poorly planned, will not be enough. Placing an emphasis on teaching pupils the signs of healthy and unhealthy relationships and on staying safe is a key component. We are putting a traffic light system in pupils' heads to help them build trusting relationships, but also to warn them when something's starting to go wrong and to know what to do about it, whether it's harassment or being drawn into websites that encourage the meeting of people who are promoting anorexia as a lifestyle choice, extremist political stances or action, or dangerous cults. A critical part of RSHE is building up pupils' knowledge to teach them about key concepts such as privacy, respect, consent, and commitment. Respect brings with it, of course, respect for others in different types of families or relationships. The teaching of respect, of course, is linked closely about British values, teaching about equality, and learning about the protected characteristics. Incidentally, teaching about the protected characteristics is about pupils learning how people belong to many groups, and that being a member of some groups can cause other groups to be unkind or treat them unfairly, and that this is morally wrong. So do pupils know what the concept of prejudice is? There is also a very important point to be made about how those with special educational needs and/or disabilities are being supported to learn the content. We know that these pupils are more vulnerable to abuse, and so have leaders considered how these pupils' individual needs need to be supported to help learn the relationships education, to stay safe, and to build their independence. On to sex education. What makes for effective provision here? Well, covering the content in the RSHE guidance well is certainly important, but how about how that's done? Reflecting the earlier key principle about different personal development elements supporting each other, there should be an unbreakable link to relationships education and to teaching pupils what is acceptable and unacceptable behaviour in intimate relationships, just as in relationships of other types. It's about teaching young people to understand human sexuality and to respect both themselves and others. It should support pupils to mature and develop safe, fulfilling and healthy sexual relationships at the appropriate time if they choose. This means that the need for clear information and using the right vocabulary is vital. And this is, yes, a point that could be made for every single element, but it's especially true here. It illustrates probably best of all for the need for staff to be well trained and supported with appropriate planning and resources so they can answer effectively what may be challenging questions that need careful, clear, accurate answers. And by the way, it's not positive if sex education excludes some aspects of sexuality by assuming that everyone must be heterosexual. The curriculum should acknowledge that this isn't the case and be inclusive. Secondly, the need for sex education to tackle headlong the myths and misconceptions pupils so often have. Young people we know receive huge amounts of information from their family, friends, and the programs they see and the things they read around them. And in addition, the social media is transmitting continual information to them, often from the moment they wake up to the moment they drift off to sleep. And while much of the information they receive from these sources may be accurate and helpful, a good portion of this, and often from sources that they tend to trust, is not. Facts are distorted, myths are propagated that are untrue and entirely unhelpful. That is why RSHE, and particularly relationships and sex education, is so vital. It's the one opportunity pupils have to have these myths and misconceptions addressed and having straight, factually correct information given to them that will help improve their chances of those decisions being well informed. Let's be clear. Again, this is part of helping pupils to be prepared for modern Britain, giving them the information they need to stay safe and not just to survive, but thrive in today's world with its rules and laws and expectations and systems. Unless they're taught it, they won't be able to do it. Pupils told us when we asked them in the course of our thematic review what they wanted. And one of the things they asked for most was a space where they could discuss topics they found difficult, such as the sharing of nudes. Of course, this, like all contents in the curriculum, should be done age appropriately and non-judgmentally. But have leaders and staff ensure that there is space for pupils to ask the questions they want answers to and to exchange views. And lastly, the need for it to be timely. It isn't timely for pupils to be taught about pornography just before they join the sixth form or leave school altogether. Pupils are now, from a much younger age, being exposed to pornography. Research shows us that half of 11 to 16-year-olds have seen it. And as the guidance says, this presents a distorted view of sexual behaviour and can damage the way that pupils see themselves in relation to others. So it's then very important that sufficient time is taken to explain the messages that pornography gives, of course, in an age-appropriate time and way. And lastly, careers. If effective, careers information, education, advice and guidance will support the development of confidence and resilience, part of a school's work to develop character. And to come back to those key principles in session 1 of this video, it'll be reflected in the school's expectations and ethos, systems and policies. It should be a whole school approach, integrated rather than being bolted on and separately, but should be characterised also by an ambitious approach of wide possibilities for all pupils. It shouldn't be less valued as a development priority compared to academic achievement. So such as not falling short of the standards in the Gatsby benchmarks, but a genuine promotion of all options being open, including apprenticeships and the full range of further and higher education. Staff being well trained about it, and everyone seeing that they have their part to play in supporting it. Schools also ready to meet the requirements of the Baker Clause. In some schools, there's little or no careers information, advice and guidance in Year 7, or an inconsistency into Post-16. The information and advice pupils get doesn't take sufficient account of the context of the school, thereby restricting opportunities to overcome barriers to next steps and successful career goals. Aspects such as work experience are little more than opportunistic tick box exercises. None of this is effective. Instead, there needs to be strategies to raise aspirations, especially for vulnerable pupils, the disadvantaged, and those with SEND. Pupils need a wide range of knowledge about the world of work and business. It's not good enough for them to be given advice and guidance that's partial, inaccurate, unhelpful, or biased. Sparse information at Key Stage 3, then compounded by sparse involvement and engagement at Key Stage 4, and those left at Key Stage 5 to arrange any work experience themselves. Advice scattergun, cursory information for pupils and their families about options, and any weaknesses compounded by staff coercing pupils towards the sixth form to boost numbers. Instead, there should be impartial advice, with staff from other settings speaking to pupils, pupils receiving bespoke guidance, with tutors keeping clear records for goals and next steps. The facilitation of opportunities from a wide range of employers about career options and the skills those careers need. Meaningful work experience, including Key Stage 5, helping pupils to understand the importance of it from an academic, aspirational, and personal development perspective. Support for pupils to help them with interview experience or by reviewing their CVs. And the programme should be complemented, enriched and strengthened by a range of wider opportunities. For example, maybe the National Citizenship Awards, perhaps the Duke of Edinburgh Award or the Young Enterprise Award. And talking of links, start teaching subjects making explicit, visible links to a range of related careers. For example, English making pupils aware of the connections with publishing, geography with planning and geotechnical engineering and the like. Where careers information, education advice and guidance is really effective, this isn't limited to just STEM subjects. In schools where it's far less effective, staff teaching most or all subjects never really make the links visible in lessons, not helping pupils to understand how success in that subject can support a path to a successful future career. And this element, of course, needs to be robustly monitored and evaluated for its effectiveness. And like all other elements in the PD programme, outcomes from this used to improve and refine what is offered. And to finish off, here are the most important messages from session 3. Relationships education is at the heart of personal development and so should receive the greatest of attention. Pupils need crucial knowledge to understand both positive and unhelpful relationships and to stay safe. Sex education should link with relationships education, dispelling myths and misconceptions. And whole school careers, information, advice, education and guidance to raise ambition and help pupils achieve all that they are capable of. So many thanks for taking the time to watch this video today. If you haven't already read it, you might also find our overview to research helpful, particularly the section on personal development. Our YouTube channel also has a playlist of other subject webinars and many videos about our work here at Ofsted. And lastly, a sincere thank you for all you do in your school to support pupils, and we wish you all the very best. Thank you.